She told him he was the most arrogant man she'd ever met. He agreed. Then he explained why he'd been keeping his distance, that he cared too much to risk her on someone like him. She listened to the whole speech, said nothing, picked up her tea, and left. He stood at that window for a long time. This is what happened after. London, April 1817. The Duchess of Pemford's ballroom was too warm, too bright, and too full of people pretending otherwise. 300 candles burned in the chandeliers overhead, and beneath them 300 guests moved in the careful patterns of people who understood that to be seen was the entire point of being present. Sebastian Holt, Duke of Wrenmore, stood near the east window with a glass of wine he had not touched, and a smile that had not cost him a thing. "You are not listening to me," said Lord Archie Fenn, who was accustomed to this and minded it only mildly. "I am listening to every word," Sebastian said. "You were explaining why Tattersall's is no longer worth the journey, on account of the bay gelding that disappointed you in November." "October." "October, then. My sympathy remains unchanged." Fenn laughed and took Sebastian's untouched wine from him, which Sebastian permitted. Across the room, Lady Pemford was arranging her guests the way a general arranges infantry, with purpose, with a smile, and without asking anyone's preference. Sebastian watched her redirect a baronet, absorb a countess, and deposit a young woman in precisely the position that would force an introduction with old Lord Carberry, who was 70, rich, and recently widowed. The young woman did not appear to notice she had been deployed. She was looking at the window. Not at the view. There was no view, only the dark street below and the faint reflection of the room behind her. She was looking at the glass itself, or at nothing, with the particular stillness of someone composing a thought they had no intention of sharing. Sebastian noticed her the way he noticed most things, completely and without appearing to. She was perhaps 26, fair-haired, dressed in white with some pale blue trimming that did nothing to explain why she was more interesting than anything else in the room. Lord Carberry said something to her. She turned, answered, smiled. The smile was genuine. He could generally tell the difference. And then she looked at the window again. "Who is that?" Sebastian asked. Fenn followed his gaze. "Miss Cecily Drummond, niece of Sir William Drummond. You'll know him. He's the one who argued with your father's steward over the Leith boundary in—" "Yes?" Sebastian remembered Sir William. Dull, correct, the sort of man who was right about everything and interesting about nothing. She is his niece. His niece, and until recently his dependent. Parents gone some years ago. She has her own income, not vast but sufficient. Been out 4 seasons and refused 2 offers, which everyone finds either admirable or alarming, depending on their temperament. "And which do you find it?" "Alarming," Fenn said cheerfully, "because it suggests she knows what she wants, and women who know what they want are never restful." Sebastian considered Miss Drummond, who had just said something that made Lord Carberry produce a surprised, genuine laugh, an expression that sat awkwardly on his face, as though it had not appeared there recently. Then she turned back to the window. He crossed the room. Not directly, that would have been obvious, and Sebastian had a constitutional aversion to being obvious. He spoke to 2 people, collected a glass of wine he actually intended to drink this time, and arrived at the east wall as if the window had always been his destination. Miss Drummond did not look at him. "The street is doing very little," he observed, "for those paying such close attention to it." She turned. Her eyes were grey, not the grey of fog or uncertainty, but a precise, considered grey, the colour of a morning that has decided what kind of day it intends to be. "The room," she said, "is doing a great deal. The window is restful by comparison." "You find ballrooms taxing, Miss Drummond?" She looked at him with the mild attention of someone who has just been addressed by a stranger, using her name, which she had not given him. "I find them legible," she said. "That is not quite the same thing. You are the Duke of Wrenmore." "I am." "Then you are pointed at me with intention. Lady Pemford has been arranging this room all evening. I've been wondering when you would arrive." Sebastian had been pointed at women before. He had never had one say so. "And yet you watched the window," he said. "There was no urgency. You would come when she arranged it." She glanced past him toward Lady Pemford, who was looking elsewhere with the studied absence of a woman watching very closely. "She has managed the room rather well. Lord Carberry is now beside Miss Fenwick Moore, which is where she wanted him 20 minutes ago. You have been mapping the room." "I had nothing else to do." Sebastian drank his wine. She watched him with the same quality of attention she had given the window, not unwelcoming, not warm, simply accurate. "And what does your map say about me?" he asked. "That you arrived knowing everyone, spoke to no one for longer than 4 minutes, and have not once stood with your back to a door." She paused. "The wine in your hand is your second glass, but you have drunk from neither. You hold them because it gives your hands something to do while your face does the work." The silence that followed was brief. Sebastian broke it. "That is the most precise accounting of my evening I have received. It is the only accounting. No one else appears to have looked." "No," he said, "they generally don't." Something shifted in her expression, not softening but adjusting. She looked at him with slightly less distance than she had a moment ago. It was a very small change, and he caught it precisely because he was watching for exactly that kind of thing, the way a man watches for movement in a room he thinks is empty. "You are wondering," she said, "whether I said it to flatter you. I am wondering whether you meant it as a warning." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Both," she said after a moment, "if that is not too contradictory." "On the contrary, most true things are." Lady Pemford arrived at Sebastian's elbow with the timing of a woman who had been waiting for a pause. "I see you have found each other. How delightful, I had so hoped. Miss Drummond, you must let his Grace take you into supper. I have placed you quite near one another. It would be such a waste." "How kind," said Miss Drummond without inflection. Sebastian offered his arm. She took it with the composure of someone who had agreed to nothing beyond the next 20 minutes. Supper was the kind of long, crowded meal at which private conversation was possible, precisely because the noise made it necessary to speak close and quietly. Sebastian had always found this useful. He found it useful now in a different way than usual, not as cover for charm, but because Miss Drummond, he was discovering, said things that did not carry well across a table. The supper room faced the rear of the house. A narrow courtyard below, lamplight on the cobbles, nothing in particular to look at. He noted this without knowing why, and turned his attention to the woman beside him. "You knew my uncle," she said. "I knew of him." "There is a distinction. He would appreciate it." She applied herself to the soup. "He is a man of very clear categories. Known and known of are not the same." "What are the other categories?" She considered. "Worth knowing, not worth knowing. Worth knowing, but unlikely to be worth the effort of actually knowing." She set down her spoon. "He has placed very few people in that last one." "Am I there?" "He placed you there 10 years ago on the basis of a speech you gave in the Lords. He has not revised the assessment." Sebastian tried to remember which speech. There had been several. Which one? "The drainage bill. He said you were the only man in the chamber who appeared to have actually read the relevant surveys, and that this was sufficiently rare to be remarkable." She picked up her spoon again. "He was also annoyed that you were right, because he had intended to be contrary and found he could not manage it in good conscience." "That," said Sebastian, "is a very good story." "He is occasionally a very good story." She said it with the particular dry warmth of someone who loves a person and sees them clearly. "He would be alarmed to know I told you." "Then I am grateful for the alarm." She glanced at him. The glance lasted a fraction too long, not long enough to be anything, just long enough to notice it had happened. "You do that well," she said. "Do what?" "Make a person feel as though they have said something worth saying." Sebastian set down his fork. "I was not performing just now, Miss Drummond." She looked at him with her careful grey eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think you were." Neither of them spoke for a moment. At the far end of the table, someone told a joke, and 8 people laughed. The sound enclosed them briefly, and then receded. "The drainage bill," Sebastian said. "I did read the surveys. It was an appalling bill." "I know, he told me." She almost smiled. "He said the Duke made 3 corrections from the floor that the committee had been too idle to notice for 4 months. The committee were collectively aggrieved. My uncle was collectively delighted." This time the smile arrived. It was brief, precise, and entirely genuine, and Sebastian was aware that he had been trying to produce it for the last 40 minutes without acknowledging that he was doing so. He reached for his wine. She had already looked away, speaking now to the gentleman on her left, turning to him with the same quality of attention she gave everything. Considered, present, real. Sebastian watched the side of her face for a moment longer than was warranted. Then he looked at the window at the far end of the room. Outside, the narrow rear court lamplight on wet cobbles, nothing in particular. He looked back at his plate and said something pleasant to the lady on his right. They did not speak again that evening. This was, he told himself, entirely unremarkable. One spoke to people at supper. One did not pursue them through the rest of the evening like a man with an agenda. He moved through the remainder of the night in his usual fashion. 4 minutes here, 6 there, a compliment to his hostess, a word with Fen, departure at 11. In the carriage home he replayed, without intending to, the precise quality of her voice when she said, "I don't think you were." He stopped replaying it. He looked at the window. The city moved past in lamplight and shadow. He had been married once. He knew what it was to sit across a table from a woman every morning and find he had nothing real to say to her, and to watch her understand this with a dignity that cost her more than she had expected to spend. He knew what it was to be charming to one's own wife, because it was easier than being honest, and to watch the charm land like a gift that had arrived too late for the occasion. Elinor had been a good woman. She had deserved a better husband and had not been given one, and she had died at 24 of a fever that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the fact that she had been unhappy in a way that made her fragile. And he had not seen it until it was the kind of thing one could only see clearly in retrospect. He was not going to do that again. This was not a resolution. It was simply a fact, the way the shape of one's skeleton is a fact, present, structural, not subject to sentiment. Miss Cecily Drummond was interesting. She would stop being interesting in due course, as people did. He watched the window. She was at the Hartley musicale 3 days later, which he had not expected, because the Hartleys were not her uncle's sort of people, too fashionable, too loud, too interested in being interesting. She was sitting in the 3rd row with a woman he recognized as Mrs. Grace Fellows, a widow of good sense and limited patience, and she was reading the program with the attention most people gave the performance. Sebastian sat 2 rows behind and to the left. He could see the back of her head and the program in her hands. He watched her turn it over, read the reverse, and then look at the window. The Hartley musicale was held in a room with 4 windows, all facing the garden. She looked at the 3rd one from the left, the one with the loose catch that meant the curtain moved intermittently with the draft, which was apparently more interesting than the soprano, who was, in fairness, not good. At the interval she turned and found him there. She did not look surprised. "You are also not listening," she said. "The Hartleys are estimable hosts," he said, "and Miss Hartley has considerable feeling." "She has. Feeling, unfortunately, is not the same as pitch." "Miss Drummond? I was not unkind. I did not say it to her." He moved to the seat beside her, vacated by Mrs. Fellows, who had gone in search of refreshment. "What were you reading? In the program?" "The notes on the second half. Someone has written about the first act with great enthusiasm and very little accuracy." She held it out to him. He read the relevant passage. "Impressive," he said. "They have attributed the libretto to entirely the wrong man." "By a considerable margin." "In which direction?" "The flattering one." She took the program back. "Either the writer admired the composer very much or confused him with someone else entirely. Both are possible." "Have you heard Brahms perform?" "My uncle took me to hear him sing in Edinburgh 4 years ago." A pause. "It was one of the better evenings of my life." She said it simply, without decoration, the way one states a fact about the geography of a place. He found he wanted to ask about Edinburgh, about the evening, about what the other better evenings had been. He did not ask, because Mrs. Fellows was returning with 2 glasses of lemonade and a look that assessed Sebastian with practiced efficiency. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Fellows, "how is your sister?" "Lady Carston is well, I thank you. She is in Bath until June." "Bath," said Mrs. Fellows in the tone of someone receiving poor news about a place they had hoped would improve. She sat. Sebastian vacated her seat and returned to his row. The second half began. The soprano found a slightly better relationship with the key of F major, and Sebastian sat with his program and did not look at the back of Miss Drummond's head more than twice. The 3rd time was when she glanced at the window again, the one with the curtain. The draft had pushed it, and the evening light came in at a different angle, and she watched it the way one watches a thing that is doing something mildly interesting of its own accord. Then she looked at the stage and did not look at the window again. The weeks that followed arranged themselves in the way of a London season, which is to say in the same rooms repeatedly, until you knew everyone's face and half their business, and the other half by inference. Sebastian saw Miss Drummond at the Carstone dinner, the Pelworth garden party, and the Academy exhibition, where she stood in front of a landscape for 4 minutes without consulting her catalogue, and then moved directly past 3 portraits without stopping. "You have a system," he said. arriving beside her at a large seascape that neither of them had sought out deliberately. "The portraits in this room are all of people who paid for the privilege of being painted," she said. "They are competent. The landscape and the seascape were submitted. There is more to look at. That is a system. It generally works." She examined the seascape. "This one less so. The water is convincing and the sky is not." "The sky is very blue," Sebastian offered. "The sky is the blue of someone who has decided what blue is and has not looked at the sky recently." She tilted her head slightly. "The light on the water is good, though. He knows water." "You paint?" "I did. I was not good enough to continue and wise enough to know it." She said this without regret, the way one discusses a road one took and did not enjoy. "My uncle paints. He is also not good enough, but he does not know it, and I have never told him." "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because it makes him happy and does no one any harm. That seems sufficient." Sebastian thought about this. "You are kinder than you appear." She turned to look at the next painting. "I appear perfectly kind," she said. "You mean I am kinder than I am blunt. Those are not the same thing." He laughed. It was not a social laugh. It arrived before he could decide whether to produce it, which was the relevant distinction. She glanced at him, registered this, and moved on to the next canvas. He followed and did not examine why. It was Fen who made it inconvenient. They were at Brooks's on a Tuesday, which meant Fen was losing at cards and wished to discuss something other than cards, and so he discussed Sebastian instead, which he did periodically and without much embarrassment. "You have been at 6 of the same events as Miss Drummond," Fen said. "London is not large. London is enormous. You are selective about where you appear. You have not been to the Standish Ball, the Morley dinner, or the Beauchamp concert, all of which are more important by the usual measures." Fen arranged his cards. "You have been to the Hartley musicale, which is not important by any measure." Sebastian said nothing. This was, as Fen knew, a form of confirmation. "She is not your usual sort," Fen said. "I don't have a usual sort. You have an extremely consistent pattern. You are pleasant to everyone and close to no one, and you manage it so well that no one appears to notice." He discarded a card. "Miss Drummond has noticed. I have seen her watch you." "She watches everything." "She watches you differently." He looked at his cards. "I am not cautioning you, I am observing. There is a difference." "There is," Sebastian agreed. "Was the Standish Ball worth attending?" "No." Interminable. Fen looked at him. She turned down Lord Comworth last season and Viscount Petrie the season before. Neither of them understood why. "And you?" Fen smiled at his cards. "I understood perfectly. She is waiting for something she has not found yet. Whether she'll find it is another question." Sebastian won the next 3 hands, which was unsatisfying in the way that winning easily is always unsatisfying, and said good night at 10. In his carriage he looked at the window and thought about what Fen had said, and then thought about Eleanor, about the particular quality of her silence in the last months, and about Miss Drummond saying, "I was not performing just now, Miss Drummond." No, that was what he had said. He had said it. She had said, "No, I don't think you were." And she had been right, which was exactly the difficulty. He watched the window. The Pelworth house party invitation arrived on a Thursday, and Sebastian's first instinct was to decline it, which was instructive. He declined Pelworth regularly without a second thought. The second thought was the problem. He accepted. Pelworth Park was 2 hours from London in good weather and 3 in poor, and the party was for a fortnight, which was either too long or necessary depending on one's reasons for attending. Sebastian arrived on a Saturday to find 15 other guests already established and Miss Drummond in the library. She was at the window, the long south-facing window that overlooked the parterre, reading. She did not look up when he entered because she was actually reading, not performing reading, and did not hear the door. He stood for a moment. The afternoon light came through the glass and found her hair and turned it a particular shade of gold, the kind of gold that is not decorative but factual, simply what happens when that kind of light meets that kind of color. She turned a page. He crossed to the shelves and found something plausible. "Wrenmore," she said without looking up. "Miss Drummond?" "The Pelworths have a surprisingly good library." She turned another page. "I had not expected it." "What did you expect?" "Shooting trophies and agricultural journals." She looked up then, not at him, at the window briefly and then at him. "The light is good in here." "It is," he agreed. She looked at her book. He opened his. They read in silence for 20 minutes, which should have been ordinary and was not, and Sebastian was aware of this with a clarity that he set to one side deliberately, the way one moves an object from a surface that needs to be used for something else. A country house party organizes itself in ways a city cannot. In London there are exits, carriages, calls, the natural terminus of an evening. A fortnight at Pelworth had no exits. There were walks, there were dinners, there were card evenings and a billiards room, and an excursion to a ruined priory 6 miles distant, and Miss Drummond was at all of them, with the self-containment of someone who had learned that the best way to manage enforced proximity was not to resist it. Sebastian managed it less well than usual. At dinner the second evening, she was placed across from him and 3 seats to the left, which was close enough for conversation when the table was being general and far enough to prevent it when it was not. He watched her navigate Sir Hugh Pelworth's opinions about crop rotation with the focused patience of a woman who had heard worse and expected to hear worse again, and who had decided to find this faintly amusing rather than otherwise. She caught him watching. She raised an eyebrow a fraction of a degree. He looked at his plate. On the third day it rained, and 7 of the guests played cards in the yellow drawing room, and 3 took the opportunity to write letters, and Sebastian and Miss Drummond and Mrs. Fellows sat in the library, because that was where the fire was best, and the card tables were loud. Mrs. Fellows fell asleep over her embroidery at 3:30, as she did most afternoons, which Sebastian suspected she was aware of, and had long since decided was her own business. "Tell me about Edinburgh," Sebastian said. He was not sure exactly when he had decided to say it. Miss Drummond looked up from her book. "Which part?" "The evening, the one you described, Bram." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain moved against the windows in the slow, irregular rhythm of English rain that has no intention of hurrying. "My uncle had been unwell that winter," she said. "Not gravely, but enough. He recovered in April, and in June he took me to Edinburgh because he said a city that size in summer was worth seeing once, and he intended to see it while he was certain he still could." She looked at the window, the rain. "We were there for 10 days. The concert was on the 5th evening. We had bad seats, very high, very far, and we could see the stage only at an angle, and none of it mattered at all." "What was he singing?" She told him. He did not know the piece, and she described it without condescension. The shape of it, the particular quality of the tenor line in the second act, the way the theatre had gone entirely silent in a moment, that silence was not the convention. "And your uncle?" Sebastian asked. Something warmed in her face. "He wept. Very quietly. He was absolutely furious about it." She almost smiled. "He said afterwards it was an involuntary physical response and bore no relation to his feelings about the evening." "And did you believe him?" "Entirely." The almost smile arrived. "I also wept. He was kind enough not to notice." Sebastian was looking at her directly. He was aware of this and did not correct it. "You are very fond of him," he said. "He raised me," she said simply. "He did not have to, and he did not do it perfectly, but he did it with genuine effort and very great honesty, and those seem to me the relevant criteria." "Yes," said Sebastian, "they do." She looked at him. He looked back. The rain continued its conversation with the windows, and Mrs. Fellows breathed in the measured cadence of actual sleep. "You do not speak of your own family," she said. It was not a question precisely. "There is not much to say. My mother died when I was 11. My father was conscientious. He cared very much about the dukedom and somewhat less about the duke." "And your sister?" "My sister is the best of us." He said it without irony, which she appeared to register. "Lady Carston?" "Yes. She married well, by which I mean she married a man who is essentially decent, which is rarer than the fortune hunters would have you think." Miss Drummond set her book down against her knee. She had the posture of someone who has decided to be present to a conversation. "You think well of decency." "I think it undervalued. Charm is everywhere. Decency costs something." "It does," she said quietly. He waited. She looked at the window. The rain, the grey afternoon light that was doing nothing dramatic and did not need to. He had the sense that she was deciding something, or had already decided it, and was simply arriving at the decision from the other end. "Wrenmore," she said. "Miss Drummond? I think—" She stopped, began again. "I think you are considerably more interesting than you intend to be." He said nothing for a moment. Is that a problem? I haven't decided yet. She picked up her book again. I'll tell you when I have. Mrs. Fellows slept on. The rain negotiated with the windows. Sebastian looked at his book and read the same page 3 times and retained nothing from it except the certainty that the fortnight at Pelworth was going to be more difficult than he had anticipated. The excursion to the Priory happened when the weather had finally agreed to be cooperative, 9 days into the party. There were 9 of them, 4 carriages worth rearranged into a complicated social geometry at Lady Pelworth's insistence, which placed Sebastian in the second carriage with Miss Drummond, Mrs. Fellows and young Mr. Carstone, who was 19 and very interested in ruins. Mr. Carstone spoke about the Priory for the full 40 minutes of the journey, which turned out to be useful, since it required no one else to contribute and allowed Sebastian to sit across from Miss Drummond with perfect social justification while she listened to Mr. Carstone with the focused attention. She gave everything and periodically asked him questions that delighted him completely. She was good at that, at making people feel their enthusiasms were worthy of interest. Sebastian had watched her do it with Sir Hugh's crop rotation opinions, with Lady Pelworth's detailed account of her eldest daughter's musical accomplishments, with Fenn, who had appeared for 2 days of the party, and been thoroughly charmed without appearing to notice it was happening. The difference, Sebastian had concluded, was that with most people the attention was a form of generosity. She was listening fully because she had decided to. With him, it had been something else from the beginning. She had listened to him that first evening, with the quality of someone who expected to find something worth hearing, and had found it, and had been neither pleased nor displeased by this, only accurate about it. He was not accustomed to accuracy. The Priory was genuine, roofless nave, standing arches, a cloister that had kept 3 of its 4 walls. The party scattered in the way of people released from carriages into a contained space, and Sebastian walked the cloister alone for 10 minutes before he heard her footsteps behind him. "Mr. Carstone is in the nave," she said. "He is extremely happy. He has earned it. He knew the history of every abbot. He knows the history of every stone, I think." She walked beside him. The afternoon was mild, the sky the kind of pale blue that is genuinely pale rather than washed out, and the old walls held the quiet, the way old walls do, as if they have simply kept it over a great many years. "My uncle would like this. Shall you write to him about it?" "I write to him every week." She looked at the arches above them, the stone still sharp in places, worn smooth in others. "He writes back approximately once a fortnight because he is very busy doing very little and considers letter writing an imposition. And yet he writes. And yet he writes." She touched the wall briefly with her fingertips, not sentimentally, just to feel the texture of it. He would say the Priory has good bones. That is the highest architectural praise in his vocabulary. They had walked the full cloister and arrived back at the entrance. The others were visible at intervals, Mr. Carstone still in the nave, 2 of the other guests examining the east wall. Lady Pelworth sitting on a fallen stone with the expression of a woman who had agreed to come and had not expected to be required to engage with rubble. Sebastian looked at the arch above the cloister entrance. The stone was carved, a pattern worn smooth by weather, difficult to make out. "What do you think it was?" he asked. She looked up. "Foliage, I think, acanthus, possibly. They were very fond of acanthus." She tilted her head. "Or it was a face, one of the 2. "It could be both." "Most things can," she said, and then without transition, "You have been watchful all week." He looked at her. "I am generally watchful." "You have been watchful of me specifically." She said it without accusation, as a statement of observed fact. "I thought you should know that I've noticed, since you appear to believe you are subtle about it." "Am I not?" "You are extremely subtle, I'm extremely attentive." A pause. "It seemed equitable to tell you." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Above them the carved stone, foliage or a face, one or the other, presided over this exchange with the indifference of something that had witnessed a great many exchanges and found none of them particularly urgent. "I notice," he said carefully, "that you have not asked me to stop." She looked at him. The grey eyes did what they did, assessed, decided, reported nothing of the decision. "No," she said, "I haven't." She walked toward the nave to rescue Mr. Carstone from his own enthusiasm, and Sebastian remained at the arch for a moment, and then followed, because there was nothing else to do, and because the afternoon was fine, and because the decision not to think about what she had just said was one he was already losing. The last 3 days of the party arrived with the particular quality of time that has been marked as finite. Sebastian noticed it in small things. Miss Drummond walked to the south window of the library every morning before breakfast. He knew this because he had taken to rising early and finding reasons to pass the library door, which was something he did not examine closely. She stood at the window for perhaps 5 minutes with her tea, looking at the parterre, and then she went to breakfast. He had watched this happen twice and had not interrupted it, and the decision not to interrupt it was its own kind of problem. On the penultimate evening there was dancing. Not a formal ball, simply the drawing-room furniture moved aside and Lady Pelworth at the pianoforte and enough guests willing to make up 2 sets. Sebastian danced once with his hostess, which was obligation, and once with Mrs. Fellows, which was kindness, and then stood to one side and watched. Miss Drummond danced with Mr. Carston, who was enthusiastic and not particularly accurate. She managed him without difficulty, adjusting her own movements by fractions to accommodate his errors in a way so fluent that he did not notice he had made them. Sebastian watched this with attention he could not entirely justify. She was wearing something pale green this evening. He did not know the technical name for the colour, only that it was the colour of the inside of a leaf held to the light. She came to stand beside him between sets, her colour up slightly from the dancing. "Mr. Carston," she said, "is a very enthusiastic partner." "He is. He trod on my foot twice and is entirely unaware of it. That seems to sum him up generally." She glanced at him. The glance held the dry quality of someone sharing a private editorial, and it lasted half a second longer than social necessity required, and he felt it in a way that was becoming inconvenient. "Will you dance?" she asked. It was simply asked. He said yes because he had run out of reasons to say otherwise. They were placed at the top of the second set, which meant a long wait before they reached each other. Sebastian moved through the figures with the people around him and was aware of her at all times the way one is aware of a point of reference in a moving space. When they came together, he took her hand and turned her, and let her go and took her hand again. And this was the entire choreography of a country dance, sequential, witnessed, rule-governed, and he found it more immediately necessary than anything else that had happened in the last fortnight, which was information he had absolutely no use for. In the figure that turned them briefly face to face and required a pause, she said, "You are thinking something." "I am generally thinking something." "You are thinking something specific. You have been for 3 days. The music moved them apart. They came back. You may as well tell me." "This is not the place." "No," she agreed. They separated again and the dance moved toward its close. When they came together for the final figure, her hand was in his, and she did not look at him, and he did not look at her, and it was quite the worst 4 bars of music he had ever stood in. She thanked him when the set ended, formally and correctly, and went to speak with Mrs. Fellows. Sebastian went and stood near the window. The night outside was clear. He could see the dark line of the parterre against the lighter dark of the lawn, and beyond it the shape of the formal hedges, and beyond that, nothing. He stood there for long enough that Fen, who had returned for the last 2 days of the party, appeared at his elbow. "You have the look," Fen said, "of a man composing a letter he knows he ought not to send." "I don't write letters." Then the look of a man composing something. Fen stood with him and looked at the garden. "She is very good for you. That will probably not make it simpler." "Nothing about this is simple. Nothing about anything is. That's generally not the reason people avoid it." Sebastian said nothing. The darkness outside did what darkness does. It showed him the room instead, the candles, the dancers, Miss Drummond across the room with her head inclined toward Mrs. Fellows, listening with her full attention as she always did. "What do you know about Eleanor?" Sebastian asked. Fen was quiet for a moment. "What everyone knows, that she was young and unwell and that you were married 3 years before she died." "What do people say?" "Nothing remarkable." He paused. "There are no stories, Sebastian. There never were." "There don't need to be stories." "No," Fen said. "There don't." He looked at the garden. "But there does need to be some version of yourself that can look at a woman who interests you and not spend a fortnight convincing yourself the kindest thing you can do is nothing at all." Sebastian looked at the window, his own reflection faint, the room bright behind him. "She deserves better than someone who is going to disappear behind good manners the moment she comes close enough to matter," Fen said, not unkindly. "Yes," Sebastian said, "she does." It was not agreement with Fen's implied conclusion. Fen understood this and said nothing further. The last morning of the party. Miss Drummond was at the library window, as she had been every morning. Sebastian had not intended to go in. He went in. She turned. She was holding her tea in both hands, and the morning light through the glass was doing the particular thing it did with her hair at this hour, the factual gold he had thought about more than was useful. "Wrenmore," she said. "Good morning." He stayed near the door. This was deliberate. She looked at him with the accuracy she always used. "You are about to say something." "I am." "Then say it." The library was quiet. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed, and footsteps moved away, and then it was quiet again. "I find," Sebastian said, "that I have spent the fortnight here trying to determine the correct distance." She waited. You matter to me, Miss Drummond. That sentence came out plainly, and I am not certain I planned it to." He stopped. "What I mean to say is that I have been watching you since April with a great deal more intention than I have let on, and I am aware that you are aware of this, and I think it is no longer honest to pretend otherwise." She had not moved. Her tea was still in both hands. The window behind her held the grey-green garden, the parterre, the morning. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that you care for me." "Yes." "And yet the sentence comes with something attached to it." He looked at her directly. "Yes." "Say that part too." This was, he thought, exactly the kind of woman she was. Not content with half a thing, not willing to let the implication carry the weight he was hoping it would carry. "I was married," he said. "My wife was young, and she was not happy in the marriage. She died. And I've spent 8 years since then very clear-eyed about what I am and what I am capable of providing to someone who deserves more than I provided her." "What did you provide her?" "Excellent manners," he said. "A handsome house. A husband who was charming at dinner and entirely absent in every way that counted." The quiet in the room had a different quality now. "And you have decided," Miss Drummond said, "that this is what you would provide me. I have decided that I am not a man who should be offering himself to someone like you and pretending the past does not exist." "Someone like me," she repeated. "Not an echo, a point. Someone who has refused 2 men because she knows what she wants and will not accept less." He looked at her. "Someone who can map a room in 20 minutes and spend 4 minutes in front of a painting and tell you exactly what the painter understood and what he didn't. Someone who wept at a concert and would not have traded it for anything." She said nothing for a moment. "You know me rather well," she said finally. "I have been paying attention." "I noticed." She looked at the window, the garden, the morning light doing nothing extraordinary, simply being present. "And your conclusion, having paid all this attention, is that the kindest thing you can do is to tell me that you care for me, and then tell me why you will not act on it." Put that plainly, it sounded like what it was. "Yes," he said. She turned from the window and looked at him with her grey eyes, and whatever she saw in his face made her set her tea down carefully on the sill, which was not where tea was meant to go, and fold her hands in front of her with the composure of someone who has made a decision and is about to say it. "That," said Cecily Drummond, "is the most arrogant thing anyone has ever done me the courtesy of saying to my face." He blinked. It was the first time in the fortnight she had surprised him. "I beg your pardon?" "You have decided," she said, "what I can bear. You have looked at me, all this attention, all this careful watching, and you have decided that the appropriate response is to protect me from your own feelings by telling me about them just enough to ensure I have no recourse." She was entirely composed. This, he was discovering, was more devastating than anger. "You have decided that this is a kindness. You have not asked me whether I want your kindness." "Cecily?" The name. He had not used it before. She registered this with a slight change in her expression, not softening but stilling. "You have done this," she continued, "in your own good time, in the last available hour of the last available morning, when I must go and pack, and there is no possibility of any further conversation." She picked up her tea. "Which is either very clever or very cowardly. I have not decided which." The silence held its shape. "Both," Sebastian said at last. "I believe the answer is both." She looked at him. Something in her face was doing something he could not quite read, and he was accustomed to reading people precisely. "We will be back in London in a week," she said. "I do not know what you will do with that information." She walked past him toward the door. She did not look at the window. "Miss Drummond?" She stopped. "You are right," he said, "about all of it." She was quiet for a moment. She did not turn around. "I generally am," she said, and went. Sebastian stood in the library and looked at the window, and the parterre and the morning, which continued indifferently. He had told himself he was doing her a kindness. She had left him the kindness of his own company instead. He stayed at the window for a long time after the sound of her footsteps had gone. London received them back with the indifference of a city that had continued without them, and intended to keep doing so. The season was in its final weeks, the social calendar thinning at the edges, as families began the calculations that preceded departure for the country. Sebastian returned to his house in Grosvenor Square on a Thursday and spent the weekend doing the things that filled his weeks: correspondence, his steward, 2 meetings in the Lords, dinner at his club, a call on his sister, who had returned from Bath with excellent colour, and a very clear opinion about how he had spent the fortnight at Pelworth. "Fen wrote to me," Lady Carston said. "Fen has many admirable qualities," Sebastian said. "Discretion is not among them." His sister, whose name was Diana and who was 31 and had made it her business since childhood to look at her brother without the buffer of charm he offered everyone else, poured his tea and set it in front of him with the deliberate patience of someone who has waited a long time and is prepared to wait longer. "Tell me about her," Diana said. He told her. He was not entirely sure why he had not planned to. He described Miss Drummond in the library, at the Priory, at the window in the mornings, and Diana listened with her hands around her own cup and said nothing until he stopped, and then said, "And you told her all of this, and then handed her a list of reasons why nothing would come of it." "I told her the truth." "Oh, you told her half the truth in the half-hour before she was obliged to leave, yes." Diana set her cup down. "What was the other half?" "Diana?" "The other half, Sebastian, is that you are afraid, which is entirely understandable and not remotely shameful, and yet you have arranged it in your mind so that it resembles principle." She looked at him steadily. Eleanor was unhappy. "You were 23 and you did not know how to love her, and you did not try hard enough and she died, and none of that can be fixed, and carrying it is correct and right, and I have never suggested otherwise." She paused. "But Miss Drummond is not Eleanor, and you are not 23. He said nothing for a moment. The room was quiet in the way of Diana's rooms, which were always slightly warmer and slightly more orderly than anywhere else. "She told me I was arrogant," he said. Diana's face did something very brief that was almost a smile. "Was she right?" "Yes." "Then she is paying attention." Diana picked up her cup again. "You should go and see her." "It has been 4 days." "It has been 8 years," Diana said. 4 days is nothing." He did not go immediately. He was not, he told himself, being cowardly. He was being precise. He had said something in that library that could not be unsaid, and she had responded with something that could not be unheard, and the situation required thought, not impulse. He thought about it for 6 days, which was not thought. It was delay wearing thought's coat. On the 7th day, he sent a card to Sir William Drummond's house in Brook Street, requesting the honour of a call at Miss Drummond's convenience. The reply came back by afternoon. Miss Drummond was at home Tuesdays and Fridays between 11 and 1. Today was Wednesday. He went to his club. He read the papers. He had dinner and spoke to 3 people and listened to a debate about the corn laws that he normally found engrossing and tonight found impossible. He went home. He looked at the window. Outside, Grosvenor Square was doing nothing it did not do every night. Carriages, lanterns, the quiet percussion of a city settling toward midnight. He thought about Eleanor, not the way he usually thought about her. The guilt arranged into something manageable, the resolution armoured and serviceable. He thought about her face. She had had a very gentle face. She had been kind. She had wanted more than anything to be well liked. And she had been well liked, and it had not been enough because the one person whose opinion had mattered most had been politely absent from the work of actually knowing her. He had not loved her. He had been fond of her, and he had been faithful to her, and he had been good to her in the ways that were easy and insufficient in the ways that were hard, and she had understood this within 6 months of the marriage and had been too gentle and too proud to say so. He was not going to spend the rest of his life paying for it. That was not penance. It was self-indulgence at someone else's expense. He went to bed and slept badly, and woke on Thursday with the particular clarity of someone who has finished arguing with himself. He was outside Sir William Drummond's house in Brook Street at 11:15 on Friday morning, which was as close to 11 o'clock as dignity would permit. Sir William's butler showed him to a small sitting room, not the formal drawing room which was interesting, and left him there. The room had books in it, which confirmed Miss Drummond lived here, and a window overlooking the street, and a writing desk with correspondence on it that had been covered with a sheet of paper in the way of someone who had been writing when the card arrived and did not want it read. Cecily came in at 11:03. She was wearing grey, not the grey of the evening at Pemford, something more practical, a day dress that suited her in the way that things suit people who don't require clothes to make a point for them. Her hair was up. She was entirely composed. "Wrenmore," she said. "Miss Drummond?" She sat, he sat, the room was quiet. "I did not know whether you would come," she said. "I was not entirely sure myself." She looked at him steadily. She was not going to make this easy, and he did not want her to. Easy would have meant she had reduced her expectations, and he found he could not bear that. "I want to say something," he said, "without the architecture I used last time." "Please do." He looked at her directly. "I told you the truth at Pelworth, the part about Eleanor, the part about what I am afraid I am. I want to be clear that I told you the truth, and not a construction." He paused. "What I did not say, what I arranged the timing so that I could not say, was that none of it changes what I feel. Which is not charming. I want to be precise about that distinction. It is not charm. I am not performing something. I have not performed anything in a conversation with you since the first evening, and you were kind enough to observe that, and I am hoping you will believe me when I say it." She was listening with her whole attention. "I was arrogant," he said. "You were exactly right. I decided what you could bear without asking. I decided the ending of the story before it began and called it generosity." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "I don't know how to do this well. I knew how to do my marriage competently, and competence was insufficient, and I am not willing to offer you competence." He stopped. "I am telling you this because you deserve the entire truth, rather than the shaped version. You can do what you like with it." The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Outside, Brook Street carried on. Cecily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was even. "My mother," she said, "was deeply in love with my father. Not the way people say it in novels. She was in love with him the way one is in love with a person who is genuinely one's equal, who knows one's worst qualities, and chooses the thing anyway." She looked at the window, the street, the light. "He died when I was 9. I watched her for 3 years after that, until she followed him. I watched what it was to love someone entirely and lose them." She paused. "I decided when I was 12 and making decisions of very limited quality that I would not do that I would be careful, that I would not allow myself to need someone that fully." He did not speak. "Lord Comworth was a good man," she said. "Viscount Petrie was a decent one. I did not love either of them, and I knew I would not. It seemed like the safer arrangement." She turned from the window to look at him. "I have been very sensible for a very long time, Wrenmore. I have mapped rooms and asked good questions, and I have not once in 4 seasons stood in a library at 7 in the morning thinking about a specific person's voice." The words landed. He absorbed them without speaking. "I am telling you this," she said, "because you were honest with me, and I am returning the compliment." Her hands were folded in her lap with perfect steadiness. "And because I want you to understand that when I said you were arrogant, I was not telling you to leave." He looked at her. "What were you telling me?" "I was telling you," she said precisely, "that if you intend to be in my life, you will have to be in it honestly, without the distance, without the managed warmth you give everyone else." She paused. "I have no interest in being managed." "No," he said, "I know. Do you think you can do it?" It was a direct question. He had known since the library at Pelworth that she would eventually ask it directly. He had known he would not be able to evade it. "I think," he said carefully, "that I have spent 8 years being deeply competent at not trying, and that I would like to try." He looked at her. "I cannot promise you I will not fail. I can promise you that if I fail, it will not be because I was absent. It will not be because I was charming instead of real." She considered this with the seriousness she gave everything worth considering. "That," she said, "is actually a very good promise." The clock ticked. Neither of them moved. The window showed the street and the morning and the ordinary progress of a Friday in London that had no idea what was happening in this particular sitting room. "Miss Drummond," Sebastian said. "Yes." "May I call again on Tuesday?" She looked at him, and something in her face shifted. Not the imperceptible fractions of the last 3 months, but something actual and visible, a warmth that had been present for some time and had simply stopped being withheld. "You may," she said. He called on Tuesday. He called again on Friday. Sir William, who received him once with the manner of a man doing his due diligence, asked him 3 questions about drainage legislation and appeared, by the end of the conversation, to have arrived at a provisional verdict. He did not say what the verdict was. Sebastian did not ask. He called the following Tuesday and the following Friday, and one Thursday that was not a calling day, which Cecily permitted on the grounds that he had written first. The calls were conducted with perfect propriety, which was the constraint, and propriety was a frame within which an enormous amount happened that had nothing to do with propriety. They talked about the Lords, about Edinburgh, about a novel she was reading that she found structurally flawed and emotionally compelling, about his sister Diana, who she had not met and already found, through his descriptions, entirely plausible. She told him about her parents, more than she had said in Brook Street, the specific texture of a childhood that had been happy and then abruptly wasn't, the way grief reshaped everything, including her relationship to attachment itself. He told her about Eleanor, the real version, not the guilt arranged for display, but the actual thing, a young man with no emotional vocabulary attempting a marriage he did not understand, a gentle woman who deserved more than she was given, a failure that was real and had taught him something real, even if learning it had cost both of them too much. She listened with the accuracy she always used. She did not absolve him, and he did not ask her to. She said, "You were very young." He said, "So was she." They sat with that for a moment, and then she asked about something else, which was its own kind of absolution. They were in the small sitting room always, the one with her writing desk and the window onto the street. Sometimes Mrs. Fellows was present, sometimes Sir William read in the corner and ignored them with pointed comprehensiveness. On a Friday in late June, neither of them was there. Sebastian and Cecily sat in the small room alone, which was irregular, and the street outside was loud with the particular noise of a warm afternoon, and the window was open. "We could walk," he said. They walked in the square, in view of the street, with her uncle's footman at a discreet distance behind them, which was observed and sufficient. She wore a cream muslin with her hair up, and the sun found it the way it always did, the honest, factual gold. She told him about a letter from her uncle. He had been to a lecture on geological formations and found it either fascinating or tedious. The account was ambiguous. "He is well?" Sebastian asked. "He is very well. He has also been painting again, which he describes as returning to a discipline." She glanced sideways. "It is still not good. I have seen the latest effort in his letter. He has included a small sketch as evidence of his progress." "And?" "The tree is recognizable as a tree." She paused. "Just—" He laughed. She smiled at the pavement. They walked on. The afternoon held them with the particular quality of a summer day that has decided to be pleasant about things. "I want to introduce you to Diana," Sebastian said. She looked at him, not surprised, registering the weight of what had been said, which was not only about Diana. "I would like that," she said. "She will like you." "She sounds as though she will terrify me." "She will do both simultaneously," he said. "She is very good at it." Cecily was quiet for a moment. They had reached the corner of the square and turned, the afternoon light now on their left instead of their right. "Sebastian," she said. It was the first time he heard it, the first name, the distance it covered from Wrenmore to this, and he felt it with a precision that was entirely disproportionate to the number of syllables. "Cecily." She stopped walking. They were on a public pavement in a public square, and there were people at a distance, and this was London in June, and she looked at him with her grey eyes and said, very quietly, "I am not afraid of this anymore." He looked at her. He was aware of the distance between them, which was correct and frustrating, and of her face in the afternoon light, and of the street, and of the very great inadequacy of the current situation. "Good," he said. "Neither am I." Diana Carston received them because he brought Cecily to call with propriety and tact and Mrs. Fellows as escort, with the warmth of a woman who had already decided and was simply performing the confirmation. She asked Cecily 4 questions in the first 10 minutes that had the shape of ordinary conversation and the function of something considerably more deliberate. Cecily answered them without apparent awareness that she was being tested, which meant she was aware of it entirely, and had decided to find it amusing. By the third cup of tea, Diana had dropped the assessment and was simply talking to her, which was its own verdict. Walking back down Clarges Street afterward, Sebastian said, "She approved." "I know," Cecily said. "She told me."
"She told you?"
"While you were looking at her bookshelves. She said." Cecily paused, and he heard the particular quality of someone who is reproducing something they intend to be accurate. "He has been impossible to speak to for 8 years, and I find it an enormous relief." She looked at the pavement. "She also said I must come to dinner." "You will come to dinner?" "I thought I might." She glanced sideways at him. "She is very good. You described her accurately." "I generally do when it matters." She did not answer. But her mouth did the thing at the corner, not quite a smile, more like the decision to allow a smile at some point in the near future. The dinner was a week later. Diana and her husband Henry, who was precisely what Sebastian had described, essentially decent, interested in agricultural reform, and almost entirely comfortable in the presence of a wife who was cleverer than him, which was the quality that mattered. Cecily sat across from Sebastian, and Diana sat at one end and Henry at the other, and the evening was easy in the way that evenings are easy, when no one present is performing. After dinner, Henry and Sebastian went to the study for 20 minutes in the fashion of men who have agreed to allow the women a conversation they will not be told about. Diana told Cecily something. Sebastian never knew what, because neither of them mentioned it. When he and Henry returned to the drawing room, Cecily was at the window. Diana's drawing room had a long window overlooking the garden, and she was smiling at something Diana had said, and she turned when he came in, and the smile adjusted without disappearing. He crossed to the window. Diana, with the grace of a woman who had managed her brother for 31 years, led Henry to the card table with a suggestion about piquet that Henry was perfectly happy to agree to. "She told you something," Sebastian said quietly. "She did." "What?" "That she has not seen you laugh the way you laughed at the Pelworth account before Eleanor died." Cecily looked at the window, the dark garden, the lit path below. She was not saying it to be sentimental. She was saying it as data. "Diana is never sentimental." "No, she is very precise." She looked at the garden. "The garden here is good. Henry grows things. It distresses Diana, but she permits it. She permits a great deal, I think, that she could prevent." She turned from the window to look at him. They were standing close, closer than calling hours permitted, closer than anything that had happened between them before, because this was a private house, and the Carstons were 12 feet away. And this was as close to privacy as anything in the last 3 months had been. He looked at her face. The specific arrangement of her features that he had spent 3 months learning, the set of her mouth, the particular quality of her eyes when she was deciding something, the way her chin lifted very slightly when she said something she meant. "Cecily," he said. "Yes." "I am going to ask you something. I am asking you rather than arranging circumstances so that you have no choice but to answer, because I have learned that arranging circumstances is not something you permit." "It is not." "Will you?" The question. He had thought about how to phrase it a dozen times in the last week, and what came out was not any of the versions he had rehearsed. "Will you let me court you properly? Not calls, not dinners, properly, with the intention that everyone understands." She looked at him, the grey eyes, the consideration. "You are asking me," she said, "to make it public?" "Yes." "So that it cannot be quietly retired?" "Yes." Something in her face settled, not the resolution of doubt, but the arrival of something that had been approaching for some time. "I think," she said, "that you already are courting me properly." She paused. "I think you have been doing it since April." "Then let me do it less quietly." She looked at the window, the garden, the lit path below. "Yes," she said. He brought her a book, not a gift exactly, a loan, a collection of travel writings about Italy that he had been meaning to read and thought she would find interesting. She received it with the gravity due to a book on loan, opened the first page to examine it, and discovered that he had left his card inside the front cover. She looked at him. "So you remember whose it is," he said. She looked at the card again. Then she closed the book and held it with both hands. "I will return it when I am done," she said, and the sentence had the shape of a statement and the weight of something considerably more significant. The book passed between them twice before the season ended. She sent it back with a note about the chapter on Naples. He responded with a letter about Venice. She replied with 3 paragraphs that were ostensibly about the author's geographical biases and were actually a conversation he intended to have for the rest of his life. The season's last great crush was the Barwell Ball at the end of July, and Sebastian arrived knowing Cecily would be there and found her in the second room, standing with Mrs. Fellows, wearing something the colour of deep water, blue, genuinely blue, not the painter's decision blue she had critiqued at the Academy, but the blue of the thing itself. Her hair was dressed with something small and pale at the side that caught the light. He crossed the room without speaking to anyone, which he had never done at a ball in his adult life. She turned as he arrived. Mrs. Fellows found somewhere else to be with the efficiency she had been deploying for 2 months. "You are staring," Cecily said. "I am." She looked at him. The room was very loud and very bright, and they were standing closer than the room required. "Dance with me," he said. "You did not ask correctly." "Miss Drummond," he said, "will you dance with me?" "Yes," she said, "since you asked correctly." It was a waltz, which the hostess had included with the modern confidence of a woman who had decided the waltz was here and would remain here. Sebastian took her hand and her waist, and she looked up at him, and they moved, and the room moved around them, and he was aware of her hand in his and her face at this distance, and the fact that this was the most public moment of the last 3 months, and he did not want to be anywhere else. "Everyone is looking," she said. "Yes." "You don't mind." "I don't mind at all." He turned her and the chandeliers moved overhead, and she was watching his face with the precise attention she gave everything. "Do you?" "No," she said. And then, quieter, "I find I don't mind at all." They danced. The room watched. Sebastian, who had spent a great many years being looked at and remaining entirely elsewhere, stayed completely where he was. Afterward, 2 dances, which was not ambiguous, the room had understood perfectly. They found a deep window embrasure near the far wall, its curtain drawn partway across, the ball retreating behind them into noise and candlelight. The window looked onto the street. Below, carriages, the late July evening not yet dark. She was looking at the street. He was looking at her. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." She turned from the window. "In the library at Pelworth, when you explained about Eleanor and what you were afraid of." She paused. "You said you were afraid you would damage me." "Yes." "Do you still believe that?" He considered the question as it deserved. Not the reflexive answer, not the managed one. "I believe," he said, "that I am capable of the kind of absence that damages people. I believed for a long time that knowing that was sufficient reason to remain absent from any situation where it could happen." He looked at her. "I no longer believe that. I believe that knowing what I'm capable of is the beginning of not doing it, and not the end of the conversation." She looked at him. "That is an honest answer." "It is the only kind I have left." The street below continued its evening business. The ball continued behind the curtain. "Sebastian," she said. He looked at her. She stepped, very slightly, a fraction, and raised her chin and looked at him with her grey eyes and did not say anything, because she had already said the thing, had been saying it since April, had said it in ballrooms and libraries and at ruined priories and in sitting rooms in Brook Street. He kissed her. Not a long kiss, a real one which was different. Her mouth against his, her hand coming up to his arm, the noise of the ball on the other side of the curtain. He drew back and looked at her face, the colour in her cheeks, her eyes still closed for a moment, and then open. "Well," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the street, then at him, the corner of her mouth. "I believe you owe me a correct proposal, Wrenmore." "I believe I do." "Not here." "Certainly not here." She looked at the window once more, the street, the evening, the last of the light somewhere behind the rooftops. Then she took his arm, and they went back into the room. He proposed in the small sitting room in Brook Street on a Tuesday morning. Sir William was in the corner, with his book held high, and his back turned, in the manner of a man performing deafness as a deliberate social courtesy. The writing desk stood between them. The street outside did its ordinary work. Sebastian said her name, and she looked up from the letter she had been reading, and he said, "Marry me, Cecily." Not, "Will you do me the honour?" Not the shaped version, just, "Marry me." She looked at him for a moment. The grey eyes, the consideration, the quality of attention she gave everything that mattered. "Yes," she said, "obviously." From the corner, Sir William said, without lowering his book, "About time." They were married in September. Not in London. The season was finished and the city was thin, and in any case Cecily wanted to be married from her uncle's house in Wiltshire, which was a grey stone house at the edge of a village with a church 40 yards away and a garden that Sir William had been attempting to improve for 12 years with mixed results. The morning was clear. Sebastian arrived at the church before anyone else, which was irregular and correct, and stood at the window, the old east window of the nave, its glass thick and slightly green, the kind of glass that has been in the same place long enough to become part of the light. Diana came to stand beside him. She said nothing for a while. "Are you ready?" she said. "Entirely," he said, and he was. Cecily came into the church on Sir William's arm, who was upright and formal, and had to stop twice on the walk down the aisle, because his vision, he said afterward, was inconveniently affected by the light through the old glass. She wore white, and her hair was dressed simply, and she was the most straightforwardly beautiful thing Sebastian had ever seen, in the way that things are beautiful when they are precisely themselves. She stopped beside him. She looked at him once, the grey eyes, the precise regard, and he looked back, and neither of them performed anything at all. The vicar said what vicars say. They said what was required. Sebastian put a ring on her hand, and she held still while he did it with the composure of someone who intends to wear it for a very long time. Sir William wept in the front row, quietly and furiously, and afterward denied it entirely. The wedding breakfast was in Sir William's dining room, which was too small for 15 people, and managed it adequately. Diana sat next to Cecily, and they spoke throughout the meal in the manner of two people who have already completed the work of becoming friends and are now simply enjoying the fact of it. Henry proposed a toast that was short and genuine. Sir William proposed a second toast in the form of a short speech about drainage legislation that somehow concluded with a reference to Cecily's late father, and there was a moment in the room that required no commentary. Sebastian watched his wife across the table. She was listening to something Diana said, and then she laughed, not the social laugh, the real one, sudden and brief, and looked across and found him watching. She raised an eyebrow. He lifted his glass. She turned back to Diana. They went to the house in Wiltshire for the first weeks, his family's house, not the London one, because Cecily had asked to see the estate, and Sebastian had said yes before she had finished the sentence. It was late September, and the mornings were cold, and the light came through the east windows of the breakfast room at a particular angle that moved as the meal progressed, sweeping slowly across the table from one side to the other. On the first morning, Cecily stood at the long window after breakfast with her hands around her tea, the habit she had at Pelworth, the morning ritual, and looked at the garden. The garden at Wrenmore was formal and large and well kept, and she looked at it with the quality of attention she gave things that interested her. He came to stand beside her. "Well," he said. "The parterre is good," she said. "The far bed wants something. I haven't decided what." "You may decide whatever you like." She looked at him sideways. "That is a considerable blank check." "It is an intentional one." She turned back to the garden. The morning did what mornings at Wrenmore did in September, produced a light that was not dramatic and did not need to be, simply clear and present and honest. "I think," she said, "this is going to be a very good house to live in." "Yes," he said, "I think so too." Her shoulder was against his arm. They stood at the window, and the garden did its patient late-season work, and the morning moved around them. The first year arranged itself in the way of first years, London in the spring, the estate in summer, calls and correspondence, and the business of a household reorganizing itself around two people instead of one. Cecily wrote to Sir William every week. He replied approximately once a fortnight, slightly more often now that there was more to discuss, and his letters included a series of small sketches of his current painting in progress that improved across the year from recognizable as a tree to recognizably a tree of a specific species. Sebastian wrote to Fen, who was in Scotland, that he had discovered he was capable of being present in a room in a way he had not previously attempted. Fen replied that this was the least surprising news he had received in years, and that he was delighted, and please convey his regards to Her Grace. Diana came to stay in June. She brought Henry, who spent 4 days walking the estate with Sebastian and discussing the Southfield drainage, which was a problem Sebastian had been ignoring for 3 years, and which Henry resolved in outline by the third walk. In the evenings, Diana and Cecily sat in the library, The long room with the south window, the one she had stood at that first morning, and talked. Sebastian sat with them when they wanted him, and elsewhere when they did not, and found to his genuine surprise that he could tell the difference. He had worried in the abstract that he would default to charm, to the managed warmth, the 4-minute conversation, the face that did the work while the rest of him was elsewhere. He found instead that he was simply present, that it was not in fact very difficult, that the difficulty had been the decision, not the thing itself. This was either the most obvious realization of his adult life or the most important. He mentioned it to Cecily one evening in the library. She looked up from her book. "Yes," she said, "I know. You might have told me sooner. I thought you'd prefer to arrive at it yourself." She turned a page. "I was right." "You generally are," he said, which was the sentence she had used in the library at Pelworth, and she heard the echo of it, and her mouth did the corner thing, the almost smile that was better than most people's full ones. "I generally am," she agreed, and went back to her book. He looked at the window, the summer garden, the long evening light. He went back to his book. Their daughter was born in February of the second year, small, fair-haired from the first, with the particular quality of attention in her dark eyes that made Diana say, in the first hour of meeting her, that they were in significant trouble. They named her Eleanor Jane. The Eleanor was not explained to anyone outside the family. Within the family it required no explanation. Cecily, recovering, held her daughter in the particular way of someone holding a thing they had not expected, and find they cannot put down. Sebastian sat beside the bed. He was not, as it happened, anywhere except exactly where he was. "Hello," Cecily said to Eleanor Jane. "We have been thinking about you." Eleanor Jane expressed an opinion about this. "She is objecting," Cecily said. "She will object a great deal, I expect." "Good." She looked at her daughter's face, the small, absolute, furious face of someone who has just arrived and has significant views about it. "She should." Sebastian looked at the window. February light, grey and thin. He looked back at his wife and his daughter. He was aware with the precision of someone who had spent a long time not allowing himself to be aware of things, that this was exactly where he was meant to be, and that he had nearly arranged it so that he never got here. He put that thought down. He stayed where he was. The second child arrived 14 months later, in April, with considerably less drama than his sister, as though he had assessed the situation in advance and decided to be straightforward about it. They named him William, which made Sir William produce at the christening held that October in the church at Wrenmore, a brief and comprehensive account of why the name was a perfectly ordinary coincidence and bore no relation to his feelings about the matter. He then had to stop talking because his voice had done something inconvenient. Cecily, standing beside Sebastian in the church, held the baby and listened to her uncle's speech with the smile of someone who has been planning this for 9 months and is entirely satisfied with the result. The old church windows were the same old glass, slightly green, slightly thick, the kind that has been doing this job for centuries and intends to continue. The light came through in the particular way of October light, low and golden, honest, not asking anything of the day except to be present in it. Afterward they walked from the church to the house, the whole party, Sir William, who had recovered his composure, and was now telling the infant William about the principles of responsible land management, Diana and Henry, Fenn, who had returned from Scotland with a wife, and was still slightly astonished by this fact, Mrs. Fellows, who had driven 4 hours, and announced she intended to drive 4 hours back the following morning, and would brook no argument. Cecily walked beside Sebastian. Eleanor Jane, not yet 2 and with a strong opinion about the pace, was between them, holding a hand each and directing operations. "Faster," said Eleanor Jane. "It is a procession," Sebastian told her. "Processions have a correct pace. This one is too slow." "She has a point," Cecily said. "She has your instincts," Sebastian said, "which is going to be a significant feature of the next 20 years. Longer than that." "Yes," he said, "longer than that." Eleanor Jane, having received insufficient cooperation from the procession, broke free of their hands and ran ahead toward the house. Sebastian watched her go, the small figure on the path, her coat flying out behind her, absolutely certain of where she was headed. Cecily put her hand in his arm. "Good," she said. He looked at the house, the grey stone, the windows, the afternoon light doing its particular October thing against the glass. "Yes," he said. It was the plainest sentence he had said in years and the most accurate. "Good." They walked on. The procession adjusted its pace. The light, as the afternoon settled into early evening, came through the windows of the old house in the way it always did at this hour, finding the rooms one by one, unhurried, as though it had all the time available and intended to use it. The window of the library caught it last, as it always did. For a moment the glass held the light and gave it back to the garden, and then the evening came, and the house lit from within instead.